There you are again.
Hi.
All right, everybody. We've got Diane. Is she up there? There she is. They can all see you. And we have about at least 30 people here, and more people are coming in. So, obviously, people are anxious to hear you. Is there anybody in this room that doesn't know Diana? Know about Diana? Read any of her stuff? Okay. You are. All right, there are a couple of people. Diana, let me just quickly say that
Sorry.
Diana is actually lived in St. Paul, grew up in St. Paul, taught French at the General College, was incredibly active in the anti-war movement during the Vietnam movement. And at the end of that time,
It's the university, not the General College.
Oh, so, okay.
It's the University of Minnesota.
Yep, okay. There is no General College anymore. Anyway,
I have nothing to do with the General College.
Okay, all right, it's good I'm not giving this talk. Anyway, she has remained a wonderful friend to WHAM and been incredibly important in our work against U.S. interventions, beginning, certainly during the Vietnam War, and then I first came to know her during our war on Yugoslavia, and she's been a great resource and a great writer and thinker since then. She contributes often to Counterpunch. You can get that online. Here are both of her books. I think I got 10 pages, a little bit on Russia left to read. It's an incredible book. It's indispensable. It's rich with detail. I'm going to just quickly read to you what Colleen Rowley, who is not here today, but okay. Colleen Rowley wrote review. She starts it out with, wow. No other book cuts so starkly and accurately to the heart of the current violent chaos engulfing the world and to the significance of Hillary Rodham Clinton's decade-long love affair with power that has helped push us to this precarious moment in history. The well-researched chronology and factual details compiled by Diana Johnstone about Honduras, Rwanda, Libya, Bosnia, and Kosovo to Iraq, Syria, and Ukraine turned into bloodbaths and finally into dangerous failed states constitutes the harsh reality that we need to appreciate if, as decent people, we want to regain some moral conscience, but also for our simple self-preservation. There's a little more, but that really, it is just this rich book of detailing it's pretty horrifying, actually. I mean, we're all horrified because most of us are anti-war activists anyway, but when you read this, you just think of what we've done and what we've been through over the last 30 years. So and books here are for sale. Diane, the regional electoral votes are coming in France right now, and the first ones are coming at 8 o'clock. So she has actually sacrificed getting that. but a friend, Jean Bridgemont, is going to be texting her the results, and so we're going to get those things before anybody else in this country. We're going to know the trend in France at this time. So without anything else, I will just turn this over to Diana, who's going to talk a little bit about the book and situate herself in Paris. So take it away, Diana.
Diana, we're going to mute at this end because it's feedback, okay? But we'll put the mic back on when people here are asking questions.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody from Paris. And actually, I did see the results because I have my television on without the sound. And they put the results on the screen. So I do know what's going on, and it's not all that interesting anyway. So we can get back to that. Let's see. Well, what's going on there? I don't hear you, so I don't know what's happening when I see you leaning in front of everything. Since I don't hear your sound, so
Yeah,
Everything's fine.
everything's fine. We muted so you don't hear us until question and answer time, so that you
well,
could.
I see you in front of there.
Okay, I'll sit down.
Yeah.
You could turn it so I see people or something.
Okay.
I'd feel more like I'm talking to people if I can see people. Okay, hello. That's nicer. That's better. Okay. Well, yes, actually, about myself, I didn't really grow up in St. Paul. I mean, I started first grade there, and I mean, I was with my grandparents. My grandfather was a principal of Harding High School in St. Paul, and I was living there until I started first grade there. And the name of my teacher was Miss One, and Jimmy Weinstein once said about me that I thought the world was perfectly ordered until I went to second grade, and the teacher was not named Miss Two. So I guess what he's thinking is that I would like an orderly world, but that's not the world that we're living in. And indeed, it's getting more and more chaotic, which refers to the title of my book, Queen of Chaos. I just assume you don't move that thing so much, because just leave it one place. So it's making me a little dizzy to look at it. Thanks. Now, how I wrote this book. I got way I wrote this book is really an idea came to me on my birthday, June 23rd on 2014. I just suddenly had this thing. I've got to write a book about Hillary Clinton, and so I did. And the reasons I think of two things that really pushed me to write this book. One was the horrible attack and destruction of Libya. Libya is a country that I had visited a few years before when I attended an international conference on the International Criminal Court. And so I had got a pretty good view of certain things in Libya at that time. And I saw that this was not what you think of as a dictatorship particularly. It was it was a very peaceful, prosperous place compared to other North African states. I mean, you could visit there and go to the market, and there were no beggars. The people in the market weren't even pushing you to buy things because people were living well in Libya. It was the highest standard of living in the African continent. And also, I attended a conference on the International Criminal Court. I happen to be very, very critical of the International Criminal Court. Probably I was one of the most critical people at that conference. And what was interesting is that Gaddafi, like me, was very heavily critical of the criminal court, but his viewpoint was totally absent from this international conference. Now, this is not what I think of a dictator. Here is a very important international conference with people from all over the world, and this supposed dictator was totally absent, and his viewpoints were absent too. I came the closest to saying what he would have said, I think. That is, that the International Criminal Court is a fake because you don't have a court when you don't have police. You don't have, because the only police in the world now is NATO. So in fact, the only people that can be charged are basically people that NATO powers want to charge. You can never possibly accuse anybody in NATO of committing any of these crimes. So it's obviously biased from the start. But in any case, what I found is that Libya was not at all the way it was portrayed when they decided to get rid of Gaddafi. And the stories about that were used, saying that he was bombing his own people, etc., that was totally invented, as the evidence has come out later. That was totally invented. This was just another case of like weapons of mass destruction. When we want to get rid of a leader, you get these stories into the media that there's either there's weapons of mass destruction or there's about to be genocide or something like that. And then the public will say, oh, yes, indeed, we certainly should do something about that. And then you can go and bomb the country and change the leadership. Of course, what that led to in Libya is total chaos, a chaos that is spilling over into Europe. Because Libya, the policy of Libya was to develop African countries and to use the wealth of Libyan oil, not only to have the highest standard of living in Africa for their own people, but also to develop Africa. And along with that policy of developing Africa, there was a policy of preventing masses of Africans emigrating to Europe. Now that Gaddafi is gone and his policy is gone, the Africans are worse off than ever, and they are streaming across the Mediterranean into Europe. There's nothing to stop them. Besides that, Libya itself is a total disaster, and you see, under Gaddafi was basically a modernizer. I mean, he doesn't look that way to us because we have a certain idea of what modern is. But you've got to realize, in a Bedouin country like that, Gaddafi was modernizing the country. He was developing certain things, and also his main enemy all along was extreme Islamism, which didn't like the fact that he liberated women. Which didn't like the fact that he adopted progressive social ideas. And so what we call a revolution was in fact a counter-revolution. It was made up of the people who wanted to undo the modernizing things that Gaddafi had been doing. And so that was one thing, because you see, Hillary Clinton played a very, very leading role in that disaster. And she even meant to brag about it. It's come out recently that certain of her aides thought that on the basis of this great victory in Libya, she could define a Hillary Clinton doctrine, which would be the basis of future American foreign policy. And that doctrine would mean, well, there's a bad leader there, so let's go bomb him out of office. And, and then, of course, naturally, democracy blooms, et cetera, et cetera. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that inspired me to write the book is the horrible mess that we've gotten into with Ukraine, which is actually leading us toward the possibility of nuclear World War III. Maybe we're in World War III already in a certain sense, but getting in war with Russia is even a bit more dangerous than what we're doing already. And again, Hillary has made it a point of being anti-Russian in a particular way. So these were the things that I was very troubled about, and that's what sort of got me around to, okay, I'll write a book about Hillary Clinton. But David Swanson quite correctly pointed out in his review that this book is not so much about Hillary as it is about the history and ideology of a U.S. foreign policy. So I think it's much more, somebody else wrote that it's about history, not about Hillary. I mean, Hillary to me is not even an interesting person. She is simply a shallow, ambitious woman who has decided to make herself the instrument of the Washington think tank persuasion. and is using that to pose as a great expert on world affairs, to be elected as president. She simply is the embodiment of all that is terrible in American foreign policy that has developed over the past decades. And so I discuss that, and also the ideology behind it, because that is also an important feature. So, by the way, the book is the book. I'm sort of sorry that Counterpunch decided to publish it with that plain black cover. I think that's very unattractive. I like the French version much better. I'm holding it up because I think the French cover expresses what the book is about. Because here is Hillary, 2 days before Gaddafi was murdered, arriving triumphantly in Tripoli, where she gave a speech saying that they should kill Gaddafi. So she's an utter murderess. And this is the happy murderess, 2 days before the murder occurs. And I wanted Counterpunch to put this picture on the cover of the American edition, but they didn't want to do that, so it's on the French edition instead. And I will mention that there's soon going to be an Italian edition, and in March, a big, important publisher is going to publish the German version. And I think that in the German version is likely to get publicity that is impossible to get in the United States for this book. I think I don't like to count my chickens before they're hatched, but the German publisher has set me up for an interview with Der Spiegel. You may know about Der Spiegel, and other things that are absolutely inaccessible to someone like me in the United States. So that is a little bit about the book right now. And other than that, here I am in Paris, and of course, maybe you can ask questions about that, because I liked very much the give and take of questions and answers. But then I have to hear you, okay? So I have to turn the sound back on.
All right.
We have our sound on.
Can you hear? Can you see? The crowd has grown since it first came. Colleen actually came in, and the books are flying off the table.
Sorry.
Even as we speak. So now we will take questions. Who would like to ask? I'm sure. Margaret. Now tell me if you can hear Margaret, otherwise
That's Margaret
they're
who?
still coming in.
Oh, is she talking? Were you talking? Sorry.
Diana just said something. She can't hear me. We can't hear her.
Can you hear? I unmuted her. We can hear you. Speak. No, she's not talking.
But she was talking.
I know, she was muted.
Okay.
See, there's a feedback. So when this one has its sound on, I have to mute the TV.
Wow.
But I wasn't paying attention, but I will.
All right.
Can you repeat what you just said, Diana?
I don't know what I just said.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
That's good. That's good enough.
Okay.
Margaret.
Oh, can you hear me?
Can you hear Margaret?
Stand up. Okay. Why don't you go over there to the TV? Well, anyway, I loved your book. I'm going to read it again because it was so good. Page 40, you wrote, many dissident exiles have been funded through a variety of channels, often used to convince well-intended American citizen groups that people back home want the U.S. to intervene on their behalf against their dictator. Can you talk about this in regards to Syria?
Well, yes. I mean, you see, this is just a logical result of the relationship of forces. in most countries, and especially in the Middle East, but not only. I mean, Ukraine too. You have people who would rather have themselves be in power than whoever is in power. And if you come to the United States and say, "Oh, I love democracy. All the people in my home country just love democracy. Just come and have a little war and overthrow my dictator, and then you will have a wonderful democratic government that will just love you." And I mentioned Chalabi because he's a well-known example of that. And you see, the United States absolutely encourages that. They go over with they have all these supposed non-governmental organizations that are in fact governmental. You know, the NED, all of those which are supposed to promote democracy. And promoting democracy often means, or practically always means, finding people in other countries who would like to be American satellites. And you know, money helps that desire to develop to be an American satellite. I just mentioned a funny thing I just noticed this week. I don't know how many of you have thought much about Montenegro, which is one of the successor states of the Yugoslavia, which the U.S. helped break up. Montenegro is a tiny country with 600,000 inhabitants, a lot of them Serbs actually, which is on the Adriatic Sea. It's just about solid rock going straight up. It is so well defended by nature that it managed to not be invaded by the Turks when the Ottoman Empire was taking over all that region. I mean, it is a country that doesn't need any defense, but recently it has decided to join NATO for its defense. Now, I say it doesn't need NATO, but NATO needs Montenegro because it's on the Adriatic. They may use its beautiful bay, which is a lovely place for tourism. They can make it into a naval base for U.S. forces, you know, because the U.S. appetite for bases is endless. Even though they have more bases than you can count, they would always like another. But the point I'm getting to is that the United States, in order to get Montenegro to join, had sponsored some 60 NGOs in that country. Now that's, given the population, that's about one NGO for every 10,000 people. And aside from that, they are bribing the media, the politicians. So finally, the politicians, oh, by the way, it's well known that the head of that country, Djukanovic, is sort of a mafia leader. He's been there for 20 years and is well known for trading in illicit merchandise. But it's just, you see, despite all that propaganda with the media constantly saying we should join NATO, all the polls show that over 50% of the Montenegrins are against joining NATO. But the country is joining NATO anyway, because the politicians want it, the media wants it, the rulers want it. Now, you can see that is the kind of government that the U.S. really likes. And when a government isn't like that, and when a government, say, doesn't want to join NATO because most of the people of the citizens are against it, that is a threatening government. And that is a government which is probably run by a dictator, which we should get rid of. And so to get rid of that dictator, we always need people who are natives of that country who say, oh, it's horrible here, we've got to come and help us, right? And so that's true everywhere. Um, and everywhere you find, you find Russians who come over and, Putin is a dictator. We've got, although Putin is extraordinary, he's probably the most popular leader in the world today. But you will find Russians who will come to New York and settle in and say, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible. The dictator, we're all suffering, we're all miserable. And the U.S., of course, just uses that. And I describe some of these things in the book, or I refer to them. I don't describe everything because it's too much. But subversion is now a central part of U.S. world hegemony. Subversion. You have subversion and you have military action. And there's more subversion than there is military action. The military action is sort of a last resort, but the subversion is everywhere. It's in France, in the sense that there's this young leaders. The US goes around the world looking for young leaders who, before they've really made their career, and it brings them to the United States and it treats them marvelously, and it helps their careers along. President Francois Hollande was one of the young leaders. So the United States has got its sort of agents, if I may say so, everywhere. And if a government is unfriendly in some way, they can cause trouble. And I think right today, that is a very important factor in Europe itself, because it's beginning to wake up. A lot of people in Europe are beginning to wake up, especially after these terrorist attacks in Paris, that they are getting into deep, deep trouble because they are getting the backlash from US-led wars in the Middle East. The United States is too far away for masses of immigrants, masses of refugees, and some terrorists among them. The US can sit back and, it's a continent, it's all by itself. It's Europe that's getting this. It's Europe that is in danger. And there is really a growing consciousness among people who pay attention to these things, especially people, by the way, in intelligence services, because often people in intelligence services keep up with all sort of things that are going along. And they're aware of this. But the fact is that Europeans, I think, are afraid of breaking with the US. And that was illustrated when in 2003, when the US was preparing to go in and take care of all those weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And the French government, with President Chirac, refused to go along with this. And you see, the fact is that the people in the French government knew perfectly well that there were not, they had their own intelligence service, and they knew perfectly well that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. They knew that was a pack of lies. And they knew also that the Middle East and Arab countries are very volatile places, and you don't just rush in, throw out the government, and establish democracy like it would be in Ohio or something like that. That it's not going to work that way. And the French knew that, and Villepin, Dominique de Villepin, who was foreign minister at the time, gave a remarkable speech in the United Nations, which people found inspiring. He was talking about, peace in the world and so on, while refusing to go along with this war. Well, what was the result? The result was an uproar in Washington. The congressmen were, the French, coward, cheese-eating coward monkeys. They were renaming French fries, which is a joke because in France they're not called French fries, they're called frites and they're considered Belgian. But in any case, um, there was not only this verbal thing, but the U.S. has all kinds of ways of blackmailing countries. Just look at, I mean, they have recently fined the BNP, the Banque Nationale, by $8 billion for doing what? Simply for dealing with countries that the U.S. sanctions. The French don't sanction those countries. There was nothing illegal in France about doing business with those countries. But the U.S. says, oh, but you deal with dollars, and the dollars go through American banks. Therefore, the United States has the right to punish the whole world. And so, in fact, even our dear allies, who are our friends, really are afraid of the backlash. And that's one reason that Sarkozy, after Chirac, rushed to Washington and say, yeah, we're going to do what you want to do. I think you see this sort of fear of U.S. retaliation is very great in places that are doing business with the U.S. You see, France, for instance, exports to the United States products that are very easily identifiable, wine, cheese, etc. It's very easy for the U.S. to put sanctions on those goods. This is one way that the U.S. Retains its hegemony. Okay, I've talked too much. More questions, please.
I was wondering whether you regard Hillary as a neocon, and also I was also wondering about her policy with Israel.
Oh, well, that's no mystery. Am I on now? Is it okay? Yeah, I say her relationship with Israel is no secret. Since Haim Saban, who is a very influential Israeli-American businessman, I mean, he has double citizenship, has said publicly that he would contribute as much money as is needed to ensure that Hillary is elected. It's very funny. I mean, he's not shy about saying that. I think there are some other people in the military-industrial complex that have the same general view, but they're a little bit more coy about the thing. Saban simply says, yeah, well, I'll get her elected. I've got the money, I'll get her elected. So it's a neocon. I mean, there's labels and labels. The thing is, I think she's studied from the neocons, and so she's become a neocon. She's sort of a convert, you might say, because she decided at one point that she wanted to become a foreign policy intellectual, and that's to make herself suitable to be president. But you see, in Washington, by now, all of the most influential foreign policy intellectuals are pretty much neocons, because the same kind of money that Haim Saban says he would give to Hillary's election campaign has already been given to the various think tanks. And the think tanks are full of neocons who are also connected to editorial pages of U.S. leading newspapers and so on. So Hillary simply saw that as the thing to do to show that she's a tough, ready to be a tough president. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know in what way she would not be considered a neocon at this point.
Hi, Diana. When you announced that your book was being republished in Italian and Germany, I wanted to lead applause right then and there. So that's just wonderful news. And I have a question, which is just a general one about any ideas that we can do here that can help your efforts. Obviously getting the book seen more. I have a friend who's written one review, but what else can we do? But before you answer the question, I also just wanted to follow up on two of your comments. One is the latest Pentagon is calling for more military bases. And I didn't read the whole thing, and I don't know how many, but I think it's mostly for the so-called pivot to China. So they're trying to open up more military bases. That was last week's news. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is probably this week, when you mentioned that the people in Europe are more in tune with the problem of refugees and terrorist attacks happening, in their midst after the San Bernardino attack, there was this rush now to pass a visa waiver, to fix the visa waiver program, which for 30 years has been very easy for 38 countries to come in, from Europe, by the way, a lot of it's from Europe. So, the fix of they did it without a committee hearing, just in a couple of days. And the fix is to have 4 designated countries that, even if if you're an American citizen, but your father is Syrian, Iraqi, Syrian, Iraqi, Sudanese, and the last one is Iranian. Okay? No Saudi Arabia on the designated countries, which is where all of the terrorists have come from. And then actually there's many other Mideast countries, there's at least 10 that have furnished terrorism over here. But they list Iran, even though, as far as I know, they are an enemy of the ISIS thing. So, there's been little or no debate, and I just wanted to bring that up because there is this little bit happening now, but stupider than stupid policies are resulting. What can we do?
Well, I don't know what you can do because, all I do is try to expose the truth about certain things. I think whatever one does, it's a good thing to know what the truth of the situation is. And then you figure out what to do on the basis of that. I can't tell you what to do. I can't even tell people here. Well, actually, I'm most hopeful about Germany, to tell you the truth, because I think the Germans are getting very, very fed up with following the U.S. into one mess after another, and especially because Germans had a war with Russia not so long ago, and it left rather unpleasant memories. And I don't think that most Germans want to be dragged into another war with Russia, and yet they're sort of on the front line. So I think that explains a little bit why I have a good publisher in Germany who is going to try to publicize my book, because I think that you don't see it in the government, you don't see it in the top, you don't see it in the media, but it's in the public opinion that's changing. The trouble is that the media and the politicians are all conformist. They just go along with the American line. How long that will go on, I don't know. I'm just hoping that they will get enough courage to do what Chirac did back in 2003 and say, no, we're not going along with it. I must say that Italy, by the way, just recently said they were not going into the Syrian war, the Italian government. And the Italian government is not as influential as the German government or the French government, but they did say no to this. Because, of course, getting into this means more terrorists at home and more migrants that they can't handle and so on. I do think that, yes, somebody's pointed out that the pivot to Asia is something that Hillary is very gung-ho about. And of course, that's another place where we could get into a war with a very, very big country. Not that the US really wants to get into war. I think what they want to do is to provoke, and also to subvert. Because don't forget these Uyghurs in Western China. There's this large Muslim minority. And you see, that is precisely one of these minorities that the US is very interested in, because there are various ethnic minorities in China. And you see, if they can cause trouble, that will weaken China politically. The real goal here, I don't think the US wants war, but it may bring it about because it provokes and provokes and provokes. And what they're really trying to do is to break up Russia and break up China. Yugoslavia was really the model. You take a country and you break it into pieces that are all hostile to each other, and then you can really manipulate all of them. And the US doesn't want to destroy Russia or destroy China. They want to manipulate it, and especially starting with Russia because it's considered weaker. You break it up and it's full of resources. And if you can have it in a bunch of little pieces that are competing with each other, then the US and its corporations and US finance can go in there, or so they think, and pretty much manipulate things. And the reason they hate Vladimir Putin is that he's a strong leader. After they were completely spoiled by having Yeltsin, who was drunk most of the time and could absolutely be manipulated by Clinton and the Americans. And now they got somebody who is looking out for his own national interest, and that is what makes him absolutely intolerable to Washington. And China, the same thing. The Uyghurs are a Muslim section in Western China, and their leader is sitting in New York, sponsored by the United States, calling for You see, all over it, it's subversion, subversion, subversion. It's very ironical, because the main thing that used to be said way back when there was communism was that the communists were subversions, that they wanted to overthrow government. Now it's the United States that is subversive all over the place, attempting to overthrow governments and break up countries into little pieces.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to change gears a little bit. You're in Paris to have the conference on climate, and it may be really the last chance to get anything done. Also, from what I've read a little bit, that Syria might be the first war that was really triggered by climate change.
Well, I don't think the Syrian war was triggered by climate change. I don't see how that's the case. I think it was triggered very well by the enemies who for decades have wanted to get rid of the Assad regime. I think, climate change has a lot of effects, but I don't think this is one of them. The regime in Syria has been on the Western hit list for decades, and you see what's going on right now is a war to break the country up. And it is quite clear what the plan is. For one thing, it's to break the country up. Well, the Turks want to take a piece. They already have a piece, by the way, because France in 1939, if you look at the map, you see there's one part of Turkey that sort of juts down along the seacoast. And and then there's a bit of Syria, and then there's Lebanon. Because Syria was a U.S. protectorate, and the French gave Turkey that piece of Syria in 1939 as a bribe, not to join Germany in the war. But you see, Turkey used to be the ruling power in all that Arab world, and Erdogan is someone who clearly wants to get back as much as he can of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, I don't think he wants it all by any means, but as much as he can. And it's very clear with the incident of shooting down the Russian plane that the Turkey aspires to occupy the northern part of Syria. Then the eastern part of Syria is to become part of the Sunni state, which is now called the Caliphate or Daesh or whatever you like it, which has been initially sponsored by Saudi Arabia and by Qatar. Now you see, the United States has been entirely in favor of this breaking up of Syria, because Assad, not because he's a dictator. I mean, that, you see, this word dictator is supposed to have some magic effect. You say dictator, and the whole left is saying, oh my goodness, we've got to get rid of him. You know, the people they call dictators in the Middle East are the modernizers. The whole policy of the United States has to be to get rid of the modernizers, because the modernizers tend to want to be independent in some way. U.S. experience, on the other hand, with Saudi Arabia, is that when these people are crazy Muslim fanatics, you can do business with them. All they want is your money, and then they go pray and all that stuff. And so the U.S. has systematically allied with the most reactionary religious fanatics in the Middle East and against the modernizers, whom they call dictators, as if Saudi Arabia were more democratic than Syria. But if you knew anything about Syria, you see it's a very westernized country. Really, I mean, you could, when it isn't being destroyed by rebels, as they call them, this is a modern westernized country. But Bashar al-Assad, who's portrayed as a monster, studied ophthalmology in London. His wife is British. These are very modern people, and we are effectively opposing them in favor of these medieval head cutters. That's what's going on, and you know, it's absolutely, it's only almost I mean, to people who aren't paying attention to what's going on, this could sound incredible. This could say, but how could our government do that? But it's been doing it for years and years and years. And it's only the unconsciousness of the popular public that allows this to go on, because most people just can't believe it's as bad as it is.
What are some good sources of information that you could recommend for us to keep abreast of?
The book. The book.
You can start with my book. Yeah, well, you see, it's, well, I write for Counterpunch, and they have a lot of good writers on Counterpunch. The difficulty is that, you see, things are very, very, very controlled these days. I mean, the media, the mass media, is totally controlled. Publishing houses are sort of maybe a little bit free, but you see, now there's no reviews of my book, for instance, and I'm not, or of others of this type. They just don't get reviewed. I would say that one could try with local newspapers. You should try to get things into local newspapers because often local newspapers are not as tightly controlled as the national mass media, which are totally controlled by the money that owns them and so on. But sometimes it's possible to get a word in smaller local media. So to get, I don't know. The fact is that I get my information simply from following the news and analyzing it. I mean, it isn't, my source is the same sources as yours. I just have more time. I only do that. See, the information is all there, but there's a well-known thing about information. Almost everything that's true is published somewhere, but usually only once, and then it's, whereas things that are false are published over and over and over and over. So people think they're true because I heard that already. That must be true because, I've heard that before. So in fact, all of the information is there. You don't really need any special sources. I use all the open sources. The difference is, I'm retired, all I do is pay attention to this. Most people can't do that. You have jobs, you have kids, you have this, you have that. Most people can't possibly keep up with this. So I'm sort of just following the regular media for everybody because I can do just that. And also I've spent a long time thinking about these things and I have some idea of history and so on. But really, I say I can't give you any source that is any particular source of mine.
Here in the great Midwest, the upper Midwest, things are falling apart, like the sewer system, the transportation system, the pollution control systems, the decision-making systems. And at the same time, we have a long peace movement and a growing younger environmental movement, and they don't seem to be able to get together. It's as if it's separate turf. And it seems to me that in Europe, the environmentalists and the peace community are a little better unified. Could you talk about that, please?
Okay. Yeah. I wish it were true that it was better in Europe. But the situation is a bit different because all of these things that you talk about falling apart, the infrastructure in the United States and so on. Well, this is because all the money goes into the military-industrial complex because all of this, you have this military Keynesianism where the investment investment goes into military things because the government pays for them. And you see, when you invest in weapons, the nice thing about it, you have a government contract, and even if the thing doesn't fly, you get paid for it. Now, this government spending could go to the infrastructure if there were a political demands for that. But the military-industrial complex has become a habit that is very, very convenient to the big manufacturers. And in Europe, it's not exactly the same thing because Germany, the European countries produce weapons too, but not anywhere near as much as the United States. I mean, the military-industrial complex in the U.S. absolutely dominates the economy because it's a huge area of sure investment for financial capital. This could be I mean, this is a theme that I think, yes, of course, this is a theme that should be a major political theme. But that's why the propaganda has to keep coming up with threats and things. You have to keep people scared of something so that they will say, well, never mind, our bridges are falling in, and there's, because there's this terrible threat, and we have to be armed and prepared to defend ourselves against this terrible threat. So you let your infrastructure collapse out of fear. And goodness knows, the United States policy in the Middle East has been perfect for creating fear because it makes enemies who actually are very frightening. I mean, Daesh and these people in the Middle East, these fanatics whose ideology comes from Saudi Arabia, our dear ally, are very scary. And so, but of course, the answer to that is to get the hell out of the Middle East, come back and fix your own country, and let it be a beacon to people because it's so great, instead of being something that scares everybody half to death. But certainly, of course, what is worse for the environment than war? What about using what do all these aircraft and things use up energy? For obviously, anti-war and environmental concerns should merge. That just seems to be obvious. All of these things seem to me very simple, and it's only because people are constantly distracted by fear or by their gadgets or by all kinds of fake stuff. Just distraction keeps people from seeing things that are really very clear and simple.
Hi, I'm Krista Dooley. I'm a one-time volunteer here at Green Bay Books, and I agree with you. The French cover is much better than this one. And I'm pledged to you that if you get your publisher to send us a cover, I will print it out and include it with every book we sell. I have read your book. It's not only enlightening, I learned a lot. At one point, as I was reading about how now we don't, our State Department doesn't work with other state departments. It finds, quote, civil society. And I ended reading that chapter. I turned on the TV, and Christian Amanpour was talking about how we had to protect the civil society in Syria. I realized that you know everything. But I also want to say I really liked your writing. I laughed out loud at one point because when you talked at the beginning about American exceptionalism, and I don't think that term needs to be explained here. But God, you said if Americans were staying at home and minding their own business, belief in the country's exceptionalism would be nothing but a quaint ethnic trait. Thank you for that. Thank you for your great writing, and send me the image.
You look so pleased. I was wondering if you could discuss somewhat Israel's role in the situation with Syria and the United States. The role of of Israel in Syria. Did you get me?
Did you hear her?
Not very well, and I can't see her because you're there.
Sorry,
but,
sorry. Can you see her now?
She wants you to discuss
about Syria.
She wants the role of.
If you could discuss the role of Israel vis-a-vis Syria.
Well, am I okay? You're turning me on. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, obviously, Syria has been on the Israeli hit list, and with that, all along, because as one of the modernizing nationalist Arab countries, it supported verbally and sometimes the Palestinians. Not that it was making war or anything, but just saying it for them. But also, you see, Israel occupies a piece of Syria, the Golan Heights, And you notice that Netanyahu in this crisis has already said out like, well, it's time for us to make this permanent, our occupation. So Israel clearly is one of those who has designs on Syrian territory. I left out Israel. I forgot that when I was talking about how the plan is now to break up Syria into pieces, and one piece would go to Israel. I can't draw the lines on that, but if you set the Golan Heights, and then it can be a little bit more here, and then you have the Sunnis here, and the Turks coming down here. I mean, this is really they're all gathered around in order to eat up pieces of Syria. Now, here is where the Russian action is very interesting and is very different from what the Western powers are doing, because the Western powers just go in and bomb places and create chaos. The Russian intervention is different because it has a purpose, has a defined purpose. And the defined purpose is to save the Syrian state from being obliterated. And I don't know whether they can do this or not. I really don't know. But the difference is that they are working in combination with the Syrian armed forces. I mean, they're using their bombing not just to wipe people out, but to help the Syrian army hold or capture a certain amount of territory. Now, I say and that's perfectly legal under international law because they were invited to do that by the Syrian government, which makes it whether you like it or not, it's according to international law. Whereas what the United States and allies are doing are in total violation of international law. That's a very important distinction for a lot of people outside the United States. And the purpose there is to preserve a state. Whereas, and I say, I don't know whether this is possible or not, but it's obviously going against what the other countries are trying to do, which is in fact to break up and destroy Syria and put various puppets in the place of that. But Israel, this is their policy, but of course, is it really? I mean, already this Daesh, Israeli state, Islamic State, or whatever you want to call it, is becoming a monster that's out of control. And if it's out of control and causing trouble in Europe, can't it eventually be out of control and cause real trouble to Israel? They don't seem to be very concerned about that. The idea is that whatever chaos is created will be creative chaos, and we'll be able to manage this chaos to our own advantage. But in this, I think the Israelis could be really playing a very dangerous game for their own survival. Because this is the West has been the Frankenstein, and Daesh is the monster that they've created, and that monster can perfectly get out of hand.
More questions? Any more? Oh, do you?
I really liked your book too. I couldn't put it down. The chapter entitled, my favorite chapter is, Libya, War of Her Own, which I think was a great title for that. And also, and the ending I thought was great when you talked about the war party. Whether it's Democrats or Republicans, it doesn't matter. It's the war, and it's just they're all both war parties. Could you discuss that a little bit in terms of, and especially now that you mentioned that Hillary might be the more plausible candidate versus, and because the Republicans will put up somebody who is kind of ridiculous, which is kind of what now Trump has become. So.
Yeah. Okay. yeah, it took me a long time to write that final chapter because I really wanted to come up with it. Oh, hooray, all we have to do is this and that, and we'll have a happy ending. And I spent weeks and weeks, and I could not think of a happy ending. And things look really bad. Things look really bad to me, because of course the Republican Party is sort of a freak show. It's pathetic. I can remember when the Republican Party was simply the party of business. Now it's become the party of ignorance and close to insanity. So obviously, Hillary is almost inevitably going to look better than any of those people. It's very unlikely that Bernie Sanders can get the nomination because all the money is on the other side. And since, it goes back to Citizens United, since the Supreme Court has given away the electoral process to big money, it's really hard to see a way out of this. I didn't write this book as a campaign pamphlet for any opposite candidate, because I don't see any good opposite candidate. I just think that Hillary is very dangerous, and I agree with something that it was in Counterpunch. I think it was Andy Levine who wrote, and he said his criticism of Bernie Sanders was simply that because he thinks Bernie Sanders can't win the nomination, that he should be using his time. Now, I don't know whether he could do this or not and still get onto the television, but that he should be using his time to point out how dangerous Hillary is, to help build a movement that can oppose her war policy once she gets into office. That what was really needed is a popular movement that will say no, that won't allow her to go on with her regime changes and so on. Because getting the war party out of office in the next election doesn't look to me possible. I would love to be wrong, and somebody will come up on the good side, just like Trump appeared on the bad side. But there is, I don't know. I mean, I can believe that anything is possible, but actually I'm pretty pessimistic. And that's one reason that I come back to putting some hope about the Europeans, because one reason that the US can get away with this war policy is that it can pretend to be the international community because it has all its obedient European members of NATO along with it. That can make it look like we're the West, we're democracy, and so and so. And so I could think that if the Europeans would only have the courage to say no, that could weaken the US aggressive policy in the world more quickly than anything else I can see. But I say I can't make that happen. I say I'm glad my book is in French and German and Italian, but that's all I can do about it. And I definitely feel that, and the level of public opinion is going in that direction in Europe, in those countries that I mentioned. Maybe not all of them, but in the countries I mentioned. Well, maybe in Britain too, because of Jeremy Corbyn and so on. So, but as for the United States, I think that the situation looks very bleak on the electoral level since Citizens United, and I just feel that what only thing that is needed is a very, very strong peace movement in the United States.
Yeah.
I think we've kept you plenty long enough, but just one. What are you seeing on your TV?
Oh well, the traditional parties blocked the National Front in all these which just means more of the same mediocre policies that we've had so far. Again, here too, I think that the political class is pretty dismal. So, but I do feel there's more rumbling and more possible to change. But the elections aren't very interesting. I won't go into that because I think that gets into another subject about French politics that we can skip.
So much. Thanks so much for being with us, and have a day, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, thanks very much.
All right, bye-bye. Bye.